Welcome to the Unitarian Congregation of Taos initial Fifth Sunday program for 2021. My name is Bob Albrecht. For our members and friends, this program is the first in a series of programs designed to educate ourselves on important issues and developments of our time. For any visiting guests this morning, we're glad that you've chosen to join us. We hope that you'll come back again in the future. First, let me share some background on our Fifth Sunday programs for 2021. The planning group has used the Chautauqua Institute model for this series. One of the core principles at Chautauqua is that as citizens, we have a continuing responsibility to educate ourselves. One of the best ways to do that is to invite experienced professionals to share their knowledge and wisdom with us. In designing the 2021 programs, the planning group decided to focus on three significant local issues here in Taos and northern New Mexico: land, forests, and water. This morning's three panelists will give an overview as a starting point for future programs. The format for our program will be a 10 to 12 minute presentation by each panelist, a brief discussion among the three, and then a question and answer period at the end. Maya Corsi, a member of our congregation, will serve as our moderator for the program. The three panelists are: Sylvia Rodriguez is a professor emerita at UNM Taos and a recognized authority on land issues in Taos and northern New Mexico. Renee Romero is a native of the Taos Pueblo and has spent his career in forestry. He is currently the fuels coordinator at the Taos Pueblo, working on forest management planning. Steve Harris is a river guide and the owner of Far Flung Adventures, a Taos-based rafting company. Steve is the founder of the advocacy group Rio Grande Restoration. He has been active in a wide range of water-related issues over the past 35 years. We're very grateful to each of you for sharing your wisdom and experience with us this morning. Now I have two housekeeping items. Please mute the audio on your Zoom panel. Secondly, if you have a question for one of our panelists, please click on the chat function at the bottom of your Zoom panel and direct your written question to Maya, who will facilitate the Q&A at the end of the program. Finally, I want to acknowledge the individuals who have made this program possible. The planning group has included Gail Minton, Yvonne Hayes, Sally Savage, Rachel Cohen, Sam Richardson, and myself. Maya Corsi has assisted in the preparations for this morning, in addition to acting as our moderator. As always, Rachel Cohen is our capable Zoom producers. With that, I'll turn the program over to Maya and our three panelists. Maya?
Good morning and welcome. It helps if I unmute myself first. Each speaker will only have about 10 minutes. And so we need to get started. So we'll have time for questions at the end. Let's get started with Sylvia Rodriguez and her thoughts about our land. Sylvia?
Unmute myself, right?
There you are.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here. And Gail Minton asked me a few weeks ago to talk about land. And what I thought would be most helpful would be to show you 8 maps, which I think Rachel can put up, to more or less illustrate the points that I want to make. We've not done this before. I sent her the maps on PowerPoint, and I guess she's going to put them up. I don't know. I hope that I'll be able to see them too. This is the first for me, and I guess for A. Rachel too. So
let's see. Let me start the slideshow
Yeah,
here, and let me know if this is correct.
Perfect. Yeah, no,
Is that
that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that's good. First of all, Taos is such a striking geophysical location, and I imagine all of you are sitting in Taos right now. I'm speaking from Santa Fe, although I hope to join you as a permanent resident in a matter of days. But I grew up in Taos, and I was born there, and my family's been there for quite a long time. And I must say, I think about Taos probably more than anything else, and especially land and water. And if you're in Taos, no matter whether you grew up there or whether you got there yesterday, there's one fact about being in the Taos Basin, which is the landscape dominates absolutely everything. And that's the show that's going on 24/7. And there's no question, I think, when you're in Taos, unlike Santa Fe or Albuquerque, although like much of the West in a larger sense, nature dominates. It really is in charge in a way that is not true in a big city. And I think that has a profound effect on everybody. We don't really know what the landscape of the Taos Basin looked like before Europeans got there. We don't know what it looked like before human beings began to cross and then gradually inhabit it. And since one of the things I'm going to be talking about today has to do with land ownership, I have to begin by acknowledging that this is obviously a land that's been inhabited by many centuries by indigenous peoples, most recently the Taos people, but also other populations, Paleo-Indians, other Neolithic people passing through, Athabascan peoples, possibly other people. But the basin itself and these rivers that you see in the map in front of you, especially those 5 rivers that make up the central Taos Basin, was inhabited and obviously well known to the Taos people before the Europeans got there. And obviously modified as well by them, because there's no such thing as a primordial landscape. I mean, once you have people, even if they're just big game hunters passing through, or foragers looking, for plants and also water sources always, people change their environment, and it's just an interactive process that's constantly happening. In showing you maps, I want to sort of raise the question, what are maps for anyway? Who makes maps and to what end? And when I think about what would a pre-Columbian map of the Taos Basin look like, we have no idea, because the concerns of the people living there would be very different from the kinds of maps that we're familiar with, which really go along with the existence of a state and have to do with mapping territory for purposes of ownership and control of the resources within that territory, but also the people. And so this, I want to start framing my comments by focusing on these maps. But anyway, here we have the basic fact, the hydrology. I mean, what's the overriding factors of the Taos land base are the geology and the hydrology of the area. And Taos is this incredible basin where you have these 5 streams, and then you have the Rio Hondo and the San Cristobal above that, but all feeding into the Rio Pueblo, which feeds into the Rio Grande. And it must have been quite stunning before Europeans got there. But one of the important things to keep in mind is what happened when the Europeans did get there. I have let me just, before I get to that, could I have the next map?
Let's see here.
Okay, this is a map that basically shows land use. And what this shows you is what kind of terrain we have here and what the possibilities are. So you have this elongated county shape. And on the right side, on my right-hand side, you have mountain and forest and what some would call wilderness. That's very steep and very green and not really inhabitable easily by people on a permanent basis. Although obviously it was known to and used by indigenous people for all of their sources of all of their materials. On the west side, and then this is bisected by the Rio Grande, and then on the west side you have what today is basically desert sage land. And then where these 5 streams or these other streams flow into the Rio Grande, you have this nexus of rivers that flow through valleys that become arable farmland with the introduction of the Acequia system sometime around 1600, after the first colony in what's now Española. Taos was soon began to be colonized by settlers who the first thing they had to do were dig ditches. So this shows you also how small in proportion the actual arable wet farmland is in the basin. It's a small percentage of the land base in Taos is actually arable and has surface water. Groundwater, of course, is throughout the basin, but there are no maps that show the interaction of the two. Anyway, I'm sorry about that phone ringing. It's nothing I can do about it. Well, let me just turn it off. Okay, next map. This shows what the ownership pattern of Taos is today and in the 20th century and today, which is that basically most of the land base in Taos County is owned by the state. I mean, by the federal government or the state government, and various there are various subdivisions of the federal government. Obviously the BLM, Interior, the Forest Service. But the point here is that a very small proportion of the land is actually privately owned in Taos. And this has to do with our tax base. It also has to do, as you can see, with the land use capacities of the terrain itself. Sorry about that phone. I can't turn it off. Next map. Okay, here you have on the right, or on my left, the land use map with the central Taos Basin outlined in it. And within that, you have a topographic map that shows the streams, a couple of the major highways, and in red, the major arteries of the Acequia system along each of these rivers. And God, it seems like all the bells and whistles in my house are going off at once. Sorry about that. That's where all of the settlement took place, radiating outward from Taos Pueblo, which is of course divided in north and south sides by the Rio Pueblo that originates in a blue lake in the mountains. All of these streams originate in springs and lakes and rich underground waters fed by snowmelt high in the mountains. And so the point that I want to make here is that the introduction, the digging of the Acequia systems, and nobody knows exactly how it took place and exactly by whom and how it was organized, but nevertheless, it resulted in these interrelated networks of ditches on streams and between streams that greened the basin and probably created the wetlands that surround the town of Taos. There were already wetlands probably fed by the Rio Lucero and the Rio Pueblo, the buffalo pasture being recognized as part of that. But the point is that the landscape that we see in northern New Mexico today is a creature to a large extent of the Acequias themselves and all of the greenery. Am I going too long or what's going on?
No, you have another minute.
Excuse me?
You have another minute. I'm sorry for
Oh, okay, keep going. Next map.
Is it the one after this, Sylvia?
Yes, next map.
Oh, gotcha.
This is New Mexico, but what it shows are a lot of the land grants, Spanish and Mexican land grants, and their domains that were, imposed by the Spanish crown and then later by the Mexican government over this area during the Spanish colonial period and into the Mexican period before American takeover. Just to give you a sense of these overlapping claims and where these grants were located. Next map. This is a map I had done for a book years ago. It's outdated in terms of the technology, but it shows the Taos area with some of the different boundaries indicated, all of the overlapping and sort of, in some cases, all distinct but overlapping, in many cases, land grants just within the Taos area, to give you a sense of the claims and counterclaims and complexities of ownership through time in the Taos Basin. And so when you think about this, you know, the mapping, the purpose of the mapping, the boundaries, and relationship to arable land and water, you begin to get a sense of how the place is inhabited, but also how it's controlled and by whom. This whole notion of ownership and control of resources is key to, I think, understanding what Taos is about, as well as the basic topography and hydrology of the basin. Last map. Final map. This is a map that was produced recently, and it shows the Taos Pueblo land claims within the context of the Emerita settlement. And so this is part of what is subsumed, at least from the federal government standpoint, under federal ownership. Of course, Taos is a sovereign nation and claims this land and would, of course, hold claims to much larger extent of it, but this is what's recognized. To just show you these sort of overlapping, yet interactive claims through time on this terrain. And that's, I guess, the basic. I've probably gone over my time, and I apologize for all the bells and whistles and phone calls and dings that have been going on during this talk, but I'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
All right, well, we'll hold the questions for the end. Thank you very much, Sylvia. Those were fascinating, and I'm sorry we only have 10 minutes each. Now, Renee Romero will share his view of forests. Renee?
Okay. Hello, everyone. It is honestly my pleasure to share with you a passion that I have for the forest, for the mountains of this valley and for the whole entire West, which is in many ways indicative of how we're connected to everything else. And let me give you, I just want to start out by saying thank you and being honored by being asked to be part of this panel today. And it's important. It's what we're discussing today is interesting on many, many levels. But let me give you a little quick background. I currently work for Taos Pueblo in my home and working on some lands that we're talking about. You know, federal agencies talk about 15-year plans, 20-year plans, but in reality, we should be looking at nature in the form of 100-year plans and longer, because nature has been taking care of us for so very long. And we as humans, we don't honor that so much. We think we can move mountains, conquer everything, take from the earth. And I find that that's backwards. It really is wrong. We should be, if we're looking for clean solutions, we should be, 2 words, imitating nature. Imitate nature. And I didn't come up with that, so I'm not that good, not that strong, not that smart. But a fellow smoke jumper of mine, friend of mine, said, Renee, one of these days, I can tell you're going to be talking to someone. And he says, remember this, if you want to know how to do something, imitate nature. So let me give you a little background why I'm here. Well, I was a smoke jumper for 16 years. My home base was Alaska. I crisscrossed Alaska and the western United States like very few people get a chance to, with a plane at our disposal and a parachute on our back. And Taos is one of a handful of special places. We all call this home. And it is one of the beautiful places. It really is. And I've seen a few. It comes down to location. location, location. But beyond that, there's a spirituality that is here. There's something deeper that connects us all. And we're gonna talk a little more about that too, but it really comes down to the forest. And it all started when I was a toddler. And my grandfather who raised me, I was the first child and grandchild. And he took me to the hills with him. And honestly, we were in the hills 6 mornings out of 7. Fishing, hunting, playing. And I thought everybody was raised that way. I found out it wasn't so. But it taught me a deep love. I would look up at those avalanche paths coming down into the ski valley off of the Wheeler side of the basin. And I go, what are those? These are amazing. What are they? And I didn't even know which way was up or down yet. And who would guess that I would become part of the ski patrol and start knocking down some of those avalanches, playing with them, looking for life. So it takes me now to my time as a smoke jumper. I used to think that the Rocky Mountains were the spine of the West. And I realized, yeah, they're important. But what's really important is the rivers, all the big rivers, all the feeder streams that feed these rivers, all the springs, everything migrates to water. And it's just like an accordion. All life comes back and forth to this water. And that is the key in the West, is the water. So the history here is interesting. The history of what's happened to our forest is deep. It goes back to 1910, when all of a sudden we determined that fire was out of control in the West. And then we started limiting, controlling all fire. But it takes you to fire in the forest. And it is something that we have to utilize, because anyone who lives on the earth and is connected to the land, this is one of your primary tools. And all of a sudden, you take away one of the tools that you have, one of your best tools, and you're saying you can't utilize fire. And it's just like tying your hands behind your wall. How am I going to take care of this land now? Because when you utilize fire, you know when to burn, you know how to take care of the earth. And you do it in a wise way. And that really is the key. So I can go on and on, but there's a couple of maps I want to show you, and it all leads to a cultural burn. So Rachel, if you can show me the first one. I propose this one map to the tribal council. Not a map, but a question that I gave them.
Yeah, Renee, let me play this slide for you.
Okay. And the deal is that we need to do something with our land. And it's a simple question there. What is the largest natural threat to Taos Pueblo? Simply stated, fire. Now, we got shown how much of land and the forest is how much of Taos County is forest. But that's the bank. That's what holds everything together, all the water. And we cannot mechanically thin that into submission anymore. We have to use fire. So I proposed a cultural burn. Why did I call it a cultural burn? Primarily because we can't, on our own lands, do anything within the wilderness. Anytime I cross even a chain of a few feet into the wilderness, I get my hand slapped. That's wilderness. You can't touch it. But then I found out that the tribal council deems it a high concern and has a tribal council resolution. Then there was a precedent set about 20 years ago where we can go in there and do the work as long as we're not using federal dollars. So Taos Pueblo is going to take on this task of starting to utilize fire again by being on the land, being connected, totally connected to it. And I say, what do you mean totally connected? There's lots of different ways I could go across it, but being basically up there and being smart about when to light fire. So, like I said, well, I can go on and on. This is some of the pictures I've taken on the trail that we're going to use. There's that left side. You see that you can't even cross it. You see the right side. And there's so many different avenues from habitat improvement, regeneration of forests, watershed management, much less the impact that wildfire does and the fear that it instills in people. But it's also your best friend on a cold winter day, is it not? You know, it is like something that you just go, oh,
One more
I get
minute.
so close to it. Okay. So with that, with 1 minute left, I want to say we've learned a lot through the pandemic. And Memorial Day is a fitting weekend to have this. Why? Because it's about learning. We get stuck in the now and we don't always think about the future. But also we don't always think about all those who came before us. And if you think about it, someone just a couple of days ago opportunistically told me, Renee, it's a lot more people under the ground that knew a lot. And we don't respect all those that came before us. And I thought about that and I said, ooh, you're right. Yeah, there's a few, you know, what is it? How many? 3 billion people, 2 billion? I'm not sure how many people on the earth, but there's a lot more that have come and lived on this land and listen to nature. So, and let nature take care of it. Okay, with that, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And a river runs through it. Steve Harris, over to you.
All right, thank you, Maya. So I'm very honored to be here, and I want to say, Renee, that a lot of what you had to say really resonates with me. I think we're doing social science here. I think we're doing social change. The way that we've managed natural resources in general hasn't been particularly productive or anything close to optimal. And that's kind of been my work as an activist. As Rachel pointed out at the beginning, I'm a river runner, and I've been very blessed to be able to spend 50 or 60 nights a year camped under the trees on sandbars with the river quietly lapping by and sometimes roaring as we camped at the brink of a whitewater challenge we were going to see the next day. I also, among the many experiences that the river has given me to kind of shape my philosophy, probably one of the more compelling ones is the fact that rivers that I've known and loved and been privileged to become acquainted with have disappeared under reservoirs. Starting with my very first job as a rookie guide on the Stanislaus River in Central California. Stanislaus now is buried under New Melones Reservoir. And the Dolores River in southwestern Colorado experienced a dam building project, McPhee Reservoir. And the Dolores now is subject to everything downstream of McPhee Reservoir is subject to the needs and the economic ambitions of farmers in southwestern New Mexico. The Dolores too is partly dead under the reservoir, and there are others. And this has been over a 50-year career, something that I am looking behind me in the rear view mirror. Is another water development scheme coming? Well, yes, it is. And I've been engaged recently in trying to protect the Gila River in southwestern New Mexico as a national wild and scenic river. So I'm not talking about water per se. I'm talking about water, the veins of the planet as it flows across these landscapes, and how we hopefully can do a better job of managing them. The photo here in this title slide, that's Stuart Udall on the right, Lady Bird Johnson right under Stuart, Stu's wife, the Secret Service man, and a Big Bend National Park ranger. And I
Steve,
selected this, yes.
Steve, we can't see your screen. Are you sharing it?
Can you see me?
We can see you perfectly, and that beautiful photo.
Maybe I
behind you.
failed to start screen sharing first. Let me, Now you're seeing my screen, true?
Not seeing your screen yet, just seeing you.
Okay, I've pressed the share screen button here.
And you
So,
chose, did you
I've-
choose the screen to share?
Well, you should be seeing what I'm seeing, which is a selection of screens, right?
Nope, we can't see that.
Can you not see the PowerPoint? Select-
Now we can. There we go.
Okay. So we've already burned 5 minutes here. Apologies, everyone. Now you can see Stu Udall and Lady Bird Johnson with their companions. And you'll see that the title here is If Rivers Die. And of course, I just explained that to some extent, rivers are dying every day. Here's my home river. I live in Pilar, and this is Embudo. And I guess what I'm trying to do is just 10 minutes is not a lot to put much philosophical basis to the talk here, but I wanted to kind of give you a few nuggets here and hope that it gets you interested in the problem with rivers, the paradox of how we deal with water. And at the end, I'll give you some suggestions for future reading. First nugget is that planetary-wide, sufficient water exists to support a global ecosystem. So when we talk about a water crisis, and newspapers and electronic media are fond of promoting the idea that we're in crisis, there is enough water here. The problem is the distribution of water and the control of the resource. The next nugget is that climate change is a little bit different from drought. In a drought, you may have a water shortage, you may have difficulty in growing food and maintaining healthy populations of wildlife, but you are confident, we are confident that it will eventually return to the pre-existing condition. We're in unknown territory here. We're rocketing through planetary change right now. And people who make it their business to know say that the Rio Grande is going to experience about 15% less water supply in the future on the average than it has historically. And then you contrast with the water that we're actually using and moving around the countryside, and our national passion to develop this water and to monetize this water with the actual biological need of a human being, which the United Nations says is about 15 liters per day. So that's not a heck of a lot of water. How much water do we use in our lives? City of Albuquerque is busy breaking its hand, patting itself on the back for getting their water consumption down around 120 gallons per person per day, far in excess of the human need. That's bad news in a way, but it's also good news in that as we struggle to adapt to climate change, that we've got conservation as a potential ally here, as a potential new supply of water and a way forward. But the caution is that this requires us to be much more intentional and holistic about the way that we manage the water resources. And I'm, as an activist, have been very critical of the way that New Mexico in particular is managing water, and some of the false premises upon which we base our management of water. Now, this program is designed to be useful to you and to be useful at sharing of local knowledge, so to speak. But really, as Renee points out, this is a West-wide phenomenon. This is a national phenomenon, and at the highest level is a global phenomenon. And the thing that we have to be more intentional about, first of all, is development. To make this locally relevant, we might talk in later on about the Amit settlement, which is a way of allocating water among resource users. It's particularly designed after a United States Supreme Court case that says when the federal government creates a reservation, they give enough water to perform the purpose of the reservation. This is Rio Grande through Albuquerque, and you notice how straight the lines are here? This river is the way it is because in 1948, the Congress of the United States decreed that it should be 600 feet wide. Our biggest management challenges are contamination of water, and then the distribution and diversion, depletion of water. So it's contamination and depletion. One result is that when we use water in one place, the effects of that use are felt downstream. This is below El Paso. This is an area we call the Forgotten River. And that's about a 3-mile wide monoculture forest of tamarisk. It is directly as a result of building Elephant Butte Reservoir in 1912. It enabled us to completely deplete the waters of the Rio Grande. And one thing I'd like to point out is there's no clear channel. This river has ceased to function as a river. It can't do its job of delivering water very well, and it absolutely cannot maintain its own channels. This is a dead river. I'll point out that a river that's under a reservoir can eventually recover and perform its functions. So there's a number of problems going on right now with regard to the Rio Grande Compact. I think in a few days, if you're paying attention, you will read that the state of Texas has more or less prevailed in a case against New Mexico. That's going to cost us as New Mexico taxpayers some money. and it's going to have implications for the Middle Valley, which I think around Socorro, the Rio Grande, is in some jeopardy of becoming more desertified and more like that forgotten river. And so the ethical dimension of all of this is in this old dicho from our Acequia friends. Un taza para ti, un para mí, y un para los animalitos, that we are all connected here, that all of life depends upon this river, and that this is not to be judged merely in economic terms alone, but that we're stewards of nature. We're out here gardening, and we need to be doing a better job of that. So I'll let it go there.
Thank you, Steve.
If you leave up that slide, folks that have notepads could see a little additional reading that I'm recommending here real quick.
Okay.
Can you put it
Can you
back
get that
up
back
for a
up?
moment? Can you put it up for a moment, Steve? I stopped your sharing.
Okay, let me just share again.
Okay.
So the first book by Bill Du Bois is a history of the Anglo settlement and conquest of the West, according to John Wesley Powell. Powell had said that we need to organize our colonization in watersheds and consider everyone and everything within those watersheds in terms of sharing the allocation of water. The Sandra Postel book, the second one there, both these books are in print. Replenish is a lot of great ideas about moving forward, how we can all become better stewards of the resource in our lives. And of course, there are some wonderful books by Sylvia Rodriguez, Jose Rivera, and Esteban Arellano that are all in print right now about our local acequia culture, the water, the science, the social science, and the ethics of this. And then two that have been particularly formative for me is Planet of Weeds by a science writer named David Quammen. You can Google that. And an article from 1974 called A Reverence for Rivers by Luna B. Leopold. That's Aldo's son, who's a famous hydrologist. All of these authors, except Quammen, are Nuevo Mexicanos. I think that's an interesting fact. And I would recommend that that you get a hold of these. These are all readable articles and books and you know, continue your education.
Thank you, Steve. That and if you all didn't get that written down, this what is recorded. This session is recorded, and you can go back into our website and get that slide again.
And I just took a screenshot and posted it on the chat.
We'll send
anyone
it
who
out.
wants
Yeah,
to
we'll send
download
it
it.
out.
Send it out. Okay.
Thanks,
Now,
Maya.
let's take a few minutes for the presenters to share with each other their observations about any connections among their comments and suggestions about where we go from here, especially as individuals. What can we do to support the efforts that you find most important? We'll take probably 5-6 minutes to do this. Can we get all three people on the screen with me? Yeah, Renee, it looks like you, where did
Okay,
Sylvia go?
so
Here's Sylvia.
me-
Hi. Okay,
Yeah.
Renee has his hand up.
so let me start out real quick by how can we make an impact? And let me start out by saying, what is it, Taoseña? You know, you hear that word thrown around constantly in a good and a bad way. But I remember having a conversation about what a Taoseña is with some property owners that have been property owners for generations on the plaza. And they were going up and down saying, oh, they don't get it. They're not real Taoseños. They're not from here. You know, you've heard this all conversation going on and on before. And I looked at them, and finally, after a while, I just said, you know, a Taoseño is anyone who cares enough to make a difference. And it doesn't matter if you've been here 6 months or 6 generations. It's about doing it for the right reasons, which is not for self-gain, but really for taking care of this place that you have been drawn to for a reason. And with that, that's kind of my lead into saying, you know, we're all connected. It is connected. And like I said, they got so upset at me, honestly, that they didn't talk to me for a couple of years, because I finally ended up saying that if you want to play that game, then none of you are Taoseñas. And when I said that to them, they got so upset that honestly, it struck a nerve in them, because all of a sudden they realized, you know, we're here and we're here for a reason. Let's help each other. Let's support each other versus fighting each other every step of the way. So that leads me to one thought process, and that comes down to, you know, what is your mission statement? What do you want to do to make this place better? And you wouldn't be on this conference, Zoom conference call, if you didn't care. So I already applaud that portion of who you are. You've made that effort to want to care. You want to learn. So Steve and Sylvia, that's kind of like a catch-all, you know, about caring and about coming together with your mission statement. What is the mission statement of the Unitarian Church? You as an individual? Kind of there, because it is all connected, and it's complicated here. Let me tell you, you know, it's complicated. You start getting into acequias and land grants and tribal rights and little water settlements. The history here is amazing.
Let's hand it over to Sylvia here. And what have you got to say about that, Sylvia?
Well, I very much appreciate what both Renee and Steve are saying. And I think we're all on the same page in terms of concern about the rivers and the forests. And what unites us, I think, are these concerns. And I would suggest that in the Taos Basin, no matter where you're living, if you're living in Taos Pueblo, or if you're living in one of the colonial villages or in the housing developments, at both ends of the economic scale in the Taos area that's not hooked up to an acequia, one thing that this incredible landscape of the Taos Basin enables you to do is find yourself in relationship to your watershed. I mean, if you're living in a city, the concept of watershed has no meaning. In the West, we have that possibility, at least outside the cities. And in Taos, it's almost inescapable. And so I'd say, where are you? What's your watershed? What's the nearest river? What are the nearest acequias? And what's upstream? And this issue of fire, I think we all live in fear of. And I'm very interested in the cultural burn plan that Renee talks about. We all need, I mean, it's starting in Taos, of course, watershed restoration and thinning of forests. And of course, burning in a safe way is, obviously going to require tremendous skill and local knowledge to pull off. But we all share the watersheds. No matter who owns the land or the water rights, we're all subject to this huge hand of nature that really rules the Taos Valley in some way. And we're facing drought and we're facing climate change. And we're all creatures located in a watershed. And I think the more that you understand about what it means to live in a watershed and what that connects you to, that's like the first step in a way of becoming aware of your environment. So I see the three of us as very much sort of on different branches of the same tree. I think that, water river management all the way from the federal government down to, your mayordomo on the acequia is a really important issue and a really complicated one. And, we all have, we're all facing some enormous challenges. And I think finding both old and new ways of integrating ourselves around specific environment and there's no real separation between the environment and people. That's a false separation and it's a dangerous one. that we probably, through cooperation and mutual support and trust, could find, or perhaps have the solutions to terrible, terrible problems that are facing our generation, but even worse, the coming generations.
Thanks, Sylvia. Over to you, Steve. Do you have thoughts on what they've been saying?
Yes, indeed. I have a personal mission that's been very fulfilling, and I would characterize that as trying to embody the conservation ethic. And I think that this is it's a philosophy of take only what you need to live, leave the rest, respect others. And I really feel like this country is at a point right now where this is a desperately needed thing in each of our lives. And so I would commend that to people to be more intentional in their everyday lives about the way that they use water, the way that they use resources in general. And I have a feeling I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here, but we need ways of spreading this philosophy more broadly if we're going to be able to continue in an era of climate change to thrive.
All right. The audience has provided some questions, one for each of you at least, and that's about how much time we have. So let me quickly get to those. Sylvia, someone asks, what changes, if there are changes to the maps that you were showing, what are they, and what should we look out for in the future? What concerns you about the changes to your maps?
I'm not sure if I understand the question really. I mean, that could be a question about, history and how I read history. Those maps are sort of a way of orienting the talk. And I think they all give important information about, understanding some stuff about Taos. I think the maps that concern us all have yet to be made. I mean, it's like, what power do we have to fashion maps that will help us, restore and survive together in the coming decades, which are going to be pretty harsh.
Okay, that's food for thought. Thanks. Renee, question. I have heard that the fuel in the forest is at 100-year high due to the lack of fires in the past. How safe are the controlled burns given that situation?
This is, there's a 4-letter word that everyone uses. And it's called liability. And they're going to say you can't use fire unless you know what to do with it. And I call it a 4-letter word, but it's that fallback of fear, creating fear to control action. But at the same time, the more that you're connected and you live in that forest, on that forest, when the opportune time is to start to light a tiny little pile just after a rainstorm, early in the morning, after the snows in the springtime, after the snows have melted, and there's that receding snow line that is going up on any given slope. And you can do so much good if you ignite those fuels below and it burns up into the slope, up into the snow. Okay, there's so many ways of using nature in a positive ways. And beyond that, we have now finally realized, Forest Service and everyone else out there has realized that fire is a resource and we can manage fires.
Thank you.
Okay, so there's plenty of tools that we're realizing that we have to utilize to make this happen. And it's really about using critical techniques of monitoring, looking at the before and after, but really starting very careful, very slow, because you never put down more fire than you can control.
I hear you saying too, that the more we're in nature and paying attention, the more we would naturally understand some of those opportunities and limits.
Exactly.
I have a
We-
question now for, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's when we're disconnected to all of nature that we tend to fall back to those things that are thrown at us. Fear. You can't do that, you know. But it's really being connected to the land. And I can go on and on, but I don't want to get. Let's go to Steve's question.
Let's give Steve his last question, and then we'll see where we go from here. Steve, one of the audience asks, what was the thrust of your discussions with legislators during the last two sessions with respect to these issues?
Well, of course, we were in a virtual session this past session, so I think that the message that I've been trying to portray is that we're refusing to accommodate or honor nature in our resource management around water. One of the hot topics was the 50-year water plan, which was a political attempt. Everyone knows that water is highly important, but to say that we now need a 50-year water plan is to ignore the previous assessments that have been made over the past 20 or so years. We know what our problems are. And it's kind of like what Renee was saying. We have a cannot do attitude. We can't do these things for various reasons. We will offend one group of users or another, when clearly the survival of all depends on making reforms here. And I think that, you know, this last virtual session, we saw the willingness to do a number of reforms, and there's going to be more going forward. I think the one thing I would like to see the legislature do is have a New Mexico Protected Rivers program.
All right. Thank you all so much. This has been just enough to get the brain cells working.
Yeah.
And we'll look forward to continuing the conversation with you and with each other. Applause from everybody, and thank you on behalf of everybody. Bob, are you ready to wrap this up and tell us about what happens next, or shall we go to, we have a nice clip of about water that we have to play either at the end or now.
No, I am, Maya. So first of all, I want to thank Sylvia, Renee, and Steve for being willing to take time this morning, and obviously in advance of the preparation to in a sense, get us started thinking about some really, really important issues here in Taos and northern New Mexico. We've scheduled two more, we call them the Fifth Sundays because that's what they are, those months where we have a fifth Sunday. So we've blocked out time for one at the end of August and another one at the end of October, with the intention of doing, let's call it a deeper dive, or taking more time to explore some of the topics, the issues. I think one of the words that resonated with me that Renee used was complexity, that these are not simple issues, that many of them have historical roots that have become intertwined. And part of the process, I suspect, is understanding some of that history so that we have a sense of how did we get to where we are as a place to make decisions or learn more about, where do we go from here. The planning group that I mentioned at the beginning will be meeting again to develop ideas and approaches that we can use for August and October. And if you have ideas or thoughts that would be useful, please contact me or any of the members of our planning group so that we can respond to the concerns and questions. And again, I want to emphasize the importance of the willingness to educate ourselves, to take time to learn more. I think, Steve's suggestions were in terms of resources. I'm going to put up a book that I found really helpful. It's called A History of Fire by Stephen Byrne, who was a former, I don't think he was a smoke jumper, Renee, but he was spent time in Arizona as part of a crew. And I found it a valuable tool to learn more about more than just simply sort of the recent approaches toward fire policy, but much more of an extended period. So thank you all for being willing to spend part of your Memorial Day weekend with us.
Thank you, Rob, for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Oh.
Mother Earth, thank you for your beauty and for all that you've given me. Remind me never to take from me more than I need, and remind me always to give back more than I take. Él es Dios. El río.
That's a small nugget of a beautiful film, series of films that was made by UNM's Digital Media Arts on our local environment. And I can share the link with you in the chat, and then we can send it to y'all later.
I worked on those projects too, just point of reference. That was fun.